This is the Ishi Weekly, the discipline of determined intent. I am Gareth Holebrook. Thought that leads to action, action that is thoughtful. In this podcast, I will explore the Ishi spiral through the lens of an ultra-endurance athlete, leadership coach, engineer, and farmer. The first few episodes will be excerpts from the book, the autobiographical sections, talking about Ironman, Coast to Coast, and other races I've taken part in. Enjoy. The year everything aligned. The story of my Pinnacle year between Powerman Zofingen in Switzerland in September 2017 and Challenge Roth in Germany in July 2018 needs to be prefaced with a story 6 months earlier, in the second transition tent at Ironman New Zealand, after my DNF. I ordered a big breakfast at a cafe near the race start, went to a motel to change out of my tri-suit, and returned to the race venue. Theory is often a volunteer doctor at the finish line when she doesn't race. Having an inside track, I volunteered to help in the second transition, T2, as the athletes changed from cycling to running. I had nothing planned for the day, given I had pulled out at around 9:30 a.m. Many who knew me were surprised to see me, having given me a good look tap at the lakefront 7 hours earlier. I wasn't racing, and I wasn't recovering. I was present. I checked athletes as they came through, dehydration and cold in equal measure on a windy day. I watched others complete what I could not. It was a place to stand and reflect on what happened that morning. Not long after, I spoke with my father. I told him I was disappointed, more unsettled than angry. He didn't analyse it or soften it. He said I would bounce back, and that I'd have no problem doing it again. He had watched through enough cycles in my life to recognise where I was on this one. I took him at his word and began acting as if that outcome was already decided. I also decided that day that I would overcome my seasickness, my Achilles heel. I resolved to swim Cook Strait. That issue remains open, maybe one day. The first fixed point I locked in was Powerman Zofingen later that year. It would be my third outing to Switzerland for the long-distance duathlon World Championships. I signed up and trained consistently. I didn't chase marginal gains or new experiments. Running and riding honestly, repeated often, without needing reassurance from novelty. The calendar began to take shape around that decision. It also began to look like I was living the life of a full-time triathlete. Contracting work was sparse in 2017, so I took advantage. In September 2017, Powerman delivered exactly what it always does. 10 kilometres of race-pace running before the 150-kilometre bike, with hills that you climb before your legs are ready, and a final 30-kilometre run that exposes everything you tried to bluff earlier. The women started an hour before the men. Theory was racing that year, and I assumed I would catch her on the bike. I was surprised not to have seen her by the end, and by the time I got into T2, and then onto my first lap of the 4-lap run, I saw that she was running 20 minutes ahead of me. During the run, I could measure the gap between us closing by roughly 5 minutes each lap. I was doing the maths in my head while managing the effort, aware of her presence without seeing her. On the final lap, I saw the black suit with a silver fern ahead of me. She knew what was happening and pushed harder. I pushed harder still. We entered the finishing chute side by side after 9 hours of racing and crossed the line together. It remains a high point of my competitive life. The time at 9 hours and 8 minutes was a personal best on that course, positioning me in the top 10. What made it the pinnacle was that after 9 hours of work, neither of us yielded. 2 New Zealanders finishing together at the ITU World Long Distance Duathlon Championships. Endurance shared rather than solitary. 2 weeks later, we raced at the ITU Triathlon World Champs in Rotterdam. The legs were heavy and the recovery imperfect, but the posture was right. We both raced well and confirmed that Powerman hadn't been a fluke. The work was holding. It was on flight back to Auckland that I learned about Kiwiman Extreme Triathlon. December brought Ironman Western Australia again, my 4th outing. I had raced there in the prior year and set a personal best. I returned to better it and keep my accumulated finishes towards my Kona Legacy qualification. Race morning delivered another lesson in uncertainty. A shark sighting caused the lifeguards to cancel the swim. We stood on the beach for over an hour before starting the bike, already heating up under the sun. The race became a long grind. Everyone paid for the delay. Theory watched the live feed and later told me that athletes were hobbling off the bike in T2 across the board. I finished battered but intact. Not a breakthrough race, but a satisfying one under difficult conditions. A week later we were back in New Zealand for the Taupo 70.3. The lake was closed due to toxic algae, and the swim was cancelled again, replaced by a 5-kilometre run at the start. 2 duathlons in 2 weeks. I found it absurd enough to be funny. I raced anyway and finished close to my personal best, carrying that fatigue. March 2018 brought Ironman New Zealand. By then the season had momentum, not excitement, just direction. I raced in my Love the Pain tri-suit as part of Team Mojo and delivered a personal best on that course. Theory raced the 70.3 the same day and finished in the top 10 for her age group, qualifying for the World Championships later that year in Port Elizabeth, South Africa. 3 weeks later I lined up for the Kiwiman X-Tri for the first time. It was raw and brutal. It required patience and attention rather than brute force. I finished 6th. By then the season had already exceeded anything I could have planned for in the aftermath of that DNF. But there was still Roth. Back in 2017, Theory had decided that she wanted to attend another training camp with John Newsom in Germany in July 2018, aligned with Challenge Roth. John Newsom ended up being my coach leading up to Kona, and this was the first time that I spent an extended period training with him. We had been on several camps with John over the years. This one was attractive because it had been a closing arc, not a build. We booked it early, knowing the season would carry us there. Training in Germany brought together threads that had been running for years. John's calm precision, sessions shared with Scott Molina and Erin Baker, whose presence alone gave me a boost. Work done properly in good company with legends of the sport. Challenge Roth itself remains unmatched. The Solarberg hill climb, a narrow funnel of noise and humanity. Tens of thousands of spectators pressing in, cheering so loudly that it vibrates through the frame of the bike. It feels less like a race and more like being carried uphill by the sound. I rode through it steady and upright, aware that the moments like this are earned slowly and remembered forever. There was a photographer on the gantry above the crowds, and the image of me with a broad grin in middle of the crowd is one I shall look back on fondly. The race cost me on the run. I blew late and accepted it. Theory ended up with a faster run split, posting her own personal best with an overall time of 12 hours and 15 minutes, and going faster in the second half of the run than the first, which is testament to her self-governance. I finished around 11:40, consistent rather than exceptional. It was a final flourish of a long season, and it landed exactly where it should have. Earlier that year, at Ironman New Zealand, I had secured my Kona slot. I needed 12 finishers to qualify through the Legacy programme, and that completed the set. When I spoke to my father after qualifying, I was more flat than triumphant. I told him I wasn't sure I even wanted to go. I was tired and still had Roth ahead of me. He told me that I probably would do it and I just needed a rest. That conversation took place on the 22nd of April 2018. It was the last time we spoke. He died suddenly 3 days later from a pre-existing condition. At least he died knowing I had qualified. In 2017, after the DNF, he had told me I would be back and that I would have no problem doing it again. He was right, 5 times over in 12 months. Later that year, we travelled to South Africa where I watched Theory race the 70.3 World Championships in Port Elizabeth. Standing on the sidelines was unfamiliar but fitting. The season had come full circle, with continuity rather than dominance or reinvention. That 12-month stretch remains the pinnacle of my triathlon life. Every race held something different: triumph, setback, absurdity, completion. The intent held when conditions didn't cooperate. I didn't force outcomes, I stayed available to the work. Kona would come later in 2022 after deferring due to work and life. That is the story that opened my book. This one ends here. I've learned that endurance does not require drama. It requires honesty, shared effort, the willingness to keep moving when plans unravel, and to relax into the final kilometres knowing that the work has already been done. Thanks for listening to the Ishi Weekly. Please subscribe and find more content on Substack and YouTube. Ishi, The Discipline of Determined Intent, is available on Amazon and Kindle.